There's different ways of learning history. There's the social part, there's cultural history, there's architectural history, but something that we don't really talk much about is design and history. Design is very much part of the narrative of storytelling of our people's experiences. So I think that is something that we can learn from this exhibit, because in looking at the design, beyond the aesthetics of it, I think there's a lot of narrative to be discussed with regards to different aspects, whether it's women's modernity or economic history, as is the case of the sugar industry, for example, in Bacolod, in Negros. What I want people to see in this exhibit is beyond the things, is that how design was interwoven and became an expression of how we were at that period in our history. I'm Ivan Mandy, and I'm the guest curator for this exhibit, Art Deco, Modernity and Design in the Philippines, 1925 to 1950, at the National Museum. The National Museum of Fine Arts is one of the three main buildings of the National Museum complex in Manila, and they focus specifically on art. This exhibit took around almost 2 years to prepare. You could imagine the logistical challenges that we had to go through to take over 300 items from different areas of the country. So that was a very big logistical challenge that we had to hurdle. You know, when you put all of these items together, they kind of like speak to each other. It tells you the history, of how Art Deco evolved in different localities around the country. The design of the exhibit evokes a 1920s, 1930s emporium. So everything was very intentional. The lighting was subdued because we wanted to evoke a very theatrical feel to it. And then the items, of course, they are juxtaposed with each other to tell you how Art Deco design was manifested in the everyday Filipino life, through furniture, through fashion, through graphic design, and even jewelry design. So Art Deco was the design sensation of the 20th century. The French government wanted to cement their status as the forefront of design in the world at the time. They had this big exposition in Paris, which opened in 1925, and it attracted around 6 million people. And eventually, that design from that exposition spread to the world, in North America, in Europe, in South America, here in Asia, and of course, the Philippines. So Art Deco was introduced here by Western-educated Filipino architects. So some of these Filipinos who studied architecture in North America, in the US in particular, like Juan Arellano, you had Tomas Mapua, no? So they became the ones who introduced this modern style as they saw it at the time in the US, here in the Philippines. Manila became their canvas for this new architectural language, which today we call as Art Deco. So there are basic details that you find in Art Deco. You see a lot of stylizations of details. You see abstract, you see geometry. At the same time, Art Deco also took inspiration from ancient cultures, in particular Egypt. They got inspiration from these old designs and made it look modern. You see it in the reliefs of the buildings, you see it in reliefs of furniture. But also, Art Deco celebrated modernity and speed. And by the late 30s, the classical detailing of Art Deco eventually morphed into what we call as the streamlined modern, where the design took inspiration from speed. No? It took inspiration from transport, like cruise liners, cars. You see these details jumping from the automotive to industrial to architecture, things like nautical windows, like round windows or geometric reliefs. This is what we actually try to convey in this exhibit, how fluid this design was at that time. If you look at these photos, they're actually beauty queens because the concept of beauty queens were introduced in the 1900s when we became under the US. But if you look closely at the design of these formal photos, a lot of them have very Art Deco elements to it. No? But because again, it was about depictions of modernity at that period. So some of them literally you have in the clothes, in the barot saya, in the ternos of these women, they actually have very stylized and geometric patterns, which we also find in architecture. No? So that's when you see how this design language jumped from one aspect to another. A lot of these things that are exhibited, they came from different parts of the country, from Manila, from Bacolod, from Antipolo, from Tarlac. A lot of these things, they show local history. They're all about modernity, but it tells you things that are related with modernity. That includes economics, it includes social history, political history, cultural history. No? The design of the houses, for example, those in Bacolod, they were brought about by economic boom from agriculture, from sugar in particular. And that's why these hacienderos, they were able to embrace what they called as modernity at the time. So I think a lot of these items, they tell you about our country's history, the different facets of history in these localities where these items came from. How design and modernity was expressed through different objects as a result of what was happening in that particular locality. Whether it was economic, whether it was cultural, whether it was social change. Those white stylized panels are actually wall tiles, and they were done in the late 40s by the House of Precast. But again, if you look closely, the patterns were very stylized, floral patterns, which is very, very evocative of the classical language of Art Deco. And it's in such a short period of 25 years, Art Deco produced a plethora of architectural works that are still relevant to us today. Now, we still watch a show at the Metropolitan Theater. We still cross to Quezon Bridge every day, right? We still use the Rizal Memorial Stadium as a sports facility. So the biggest piece that we have in this exhibit is a cast made by the National Museum of a relief from the Capitol Theater in Escolta. Movie houses were the epitome of Art Deco architecture at that time because movies were the most modern form of entertainment during that period. So the National Museum actually made a cast of the relief of that theater. And if you look closely at the reliefs, they depict stylized representations of Filipino women. Okay, it was very modern, but they put in women with barot saya, which again evokes a very Filipino feel to it. And then if you look closely, the ladies are actually holding mask and a harp, which represent theater and music. So these are allegories to theater expressed in a very contemporary form with Filipino touches. And you know, not all regions had Art Deco. That's the thing. Typically, Art Deco, you find it in regions which were booming at that particular junction of our history. That includes big cities like Manila and regional centers like Bacolod and Iloilo. And that's why the objects that we have in this exhibit, they're really a mix of items that were sourced from different localities in the country. Because Art Deco wasn't for everyone. No? It was really related to economy. It was related to urban culture.
This video is brought to you by Lamana, the exclusive manufacturer of Ishinomaki Laboratory in the Philippines. Designer furniture that is made locally, made by hand, and made to last. www.lamanaph.com